Hey guys, happy Tuesday. It's 10 and it's time for another tip. I'm Gretchen Fleener from paintertainment.com. Today I thought I would talk a little bit about painting realistic spiders, most specifically the shadows underneath them. So I thought, hey, this might be a good tip for this week, especially with Halloween just around the corner. I'm sure all of you will be painting some spiders in the coming weeks. This is actually a subject that I cover in my realism book. I have a whole section on insects and spiders. And so I'm going to just touch on a little bit of this shading today. So as I mentioned, this is something I cover in my book, Realism for Face and Body Art. One of the many sections in here is on insects. So what I'm going to talk about today is specifically shadows underneath your spiders. You don't have to be doing a super realistic one like this. You can apply this to quick cartoony ones as well. When I teach my realism classes live at conventions and things, I always have a lot of three-dimensional visual aids like this because, I mean, what's better to help your mind grasp elements of realism than a real physical object? So this is just a little spider I made out of like emo clay and pipe cleaners. And I'm going to take this flashlight here and I just want you to see and pay attention to how the shadows move when my flashlight moves. All right, you'll notice that I want you to look at the tips of the legs down here. These legs are all touching the ground plane. This one is lifted up. So look at the difference in how the shadows react when the light moves around. The legs that are touching the ground, you can see the shadow always ends right at that leg. And they stretch back towards the body. But this leg that's up in the air here, there's a space between the end of the leg and the shadow. And that's what, when you're painting, will make it look like one leg might be up off the surface plane while the others are crawling on the skin. You'll also notice there's a shadow underneath the body of the spider. As I move the light, the direction of that shadow moves. But it's in general touching the bottom of the spider itself. Now I've raised that spider up so his belly's not sitting on the surface anymore. You can see how his body moves with the light. Okay, so if you want him to look like he's really against your skin, you want that drop shadow under the body to be touching the spider. But if you want him to look like he's really crawling up above, really tall, you might have a little gap in there between the spider's body itself and the spider's body's shadow. Again, you can see how these legs that are touching the surface, they always are touching the shadow. The ones that are lifted up off the surface are not. Keep that in mind. And then also look at where the legs, the shadows of the legs touch the body shadow there. Okay, those are going to move with that body. So it depends on where your light's going. And if your body's up off the ground or down along the ground. When the spider's lifted up like this, those leg shadows go to the body shadow. When the belly's down on the ground, they generally go kind of towards the body. All right, so that's a lot to digest right there, but let's apply some of that to actual painting and you'll see how that affects your painting. Again, my book shows examples of that same model with a flashlight, examples of what happens when you move the legs. And then I've got a step-by-step here of a spider that is walking up tall off of the ground plane with some legs up, some legs down. All right, so here's just a really quick, simple spider. I just did a dauber body there and threw on some legs. One thing that you need to also make sure for this illusion to really work is that your light is all coming from one direction. This is another thing I teach in my classes and touch on in my book. But here I'm assuming my light's coming from the upper right. So all of my highlights are on the upper right. That's really important for the shadows to look correct when you paint them. Since my light's coming from up here, all my shadows will be cast down here on the lower left. So the shadow's not just going to be black. My skin is the color of my skin, so I'm going to take a darker version of that. Just take kind of a brown for my shadow. It'll make it more realistic. So this spider's belly is right on my arm. So I'm going to put his shadow right up against him. Remember how with the flashlight, when the belly was up off the ground, there was a little gap between the body and the shadow. But here he's going to be sitting on my arm. And then the shadows, we noticed that whenever the leg was touching the ground, the shadow touched that point of the leg. Okay, so I'm going to start right at the bottom of those feet. I don't know, spider. Do spiders have feet? At the bottom of those spider legs where they touch the skin is where I'm going to go. And then I'll go towards the body. All right, and my shadow's kind of coming from here, so that's why these are off to the side a little bit. If it was right over the top, they would just go straight to the center. But my light's over here, so the shape of those legs is going to kind of mirror in that direction. There are a lot of other little things about shadows that if you want to really get down to the realism, things like how opaque it is. Here I have a darker shadow at the tip of the leg, and then it kind of fades as it moves away because there's more light getting in the way of it. More things that I need to cover in a in-person class, but just for the sake of doing this kind of quickie one, I won't get into all that. So now you can see this is the shadow for this leg, and it doesn't touch his spider foot there because the foot is not on the ground. That's what makes that leg look like it's sticking up in the air, by stopping that shadow a little bit short. So that's just a really, really quick little bit of realism you can add to even a quick design. Let's say we want this guy to be looking like he's standing up higher off of my skin. See if I can just erase a little bit of this. Here's another trick. If you need to erase something small, wrap your wipe around the tip of your brush. And then you can get in those little spots. All right, it's sort of erased. Now we want to make him look like he's standing up off the surface a little more. Before he's kind of sitting down, now he's going to be up on his legs. He's ready to pounce. So in that case, I'm going to make his body shape shadow. I'm taking the shape of his body here, and I'm just copying it down here. So maybe there's where his head is. Here's where his body is. I'm going to kind of feather the edges. The shadow is always going to be darker right up against the subject it's being cast off of. It's going to be lighter the farther you get away from it. So now his body is lifted up off of the plane he's walking across. And we can fill in those shadows again. Maybe the shadow for this leg is way down here now because he's up so high. So that's a real quick, simplified version of lighting and shadows for spiders. I hope this helps you with all of those creepy crawly things you'll be painting this Halloween and in months to come. Thanks so much for watching this week. We'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another tip at 10. Happy painting!